Hi, this is Mark Birch with a quick analysis of John Donne's selected poems. Hi, here we're going to be taking a look at John Donne's The Funeral. The title refers to the preparation for a funeral rather than the funeral itself, and that's something we'll need to bear in mind as we're reading through it. Whoever comes to shroud me, do not harm nor question much that subtle wreath of hair which crowns my arm. The mystery, the sign, you must not touch, for it is my outward soul, viceroy to that, which then to heaven being gone, will leave this to control, and keep these limbs, her provinces, from dissolution. For if the sinewy thread my brain lets fall, through every part can tie those parts, and make me one of all, those hairs which upward grew, and strength and art have from a better brain, can better do it, except she meant that I by this should know my pain, as prisoners then are manacled when they're condemned to die. Or whatever she meant by it, bury it with me, for since I am love's martyr, it might breed idolatry if into other hands these relics came, as 'twas humility to afford to it all that a soul can do, so 'tis some bravery, that since you would have none of me, I'd bury some of you. The poetic voice refers to his own death, imagining the person who comes to place his body in its shroud, and that person will be intrigued by the subtle wreath of hair around his arm. This appears to be a token of love, a kind of bracelet of golden hair that's been bequeathed to the dead person. The imperative that instructs the person not to harm or even question the wreath of hair is an indication of the poetic voice's desperation. That verb, harm, is suggestive of life, implying that in the context of this dead body, the wreath of hair lives on. Perhaps it ironically represents the continuation of love. The hair is described as subtle, suggesting that it's fine and difficult to identify. Wreath captures the shape of the band of hair, but also, of course, connotes death. And the value of the hair is evident in the use of the verb crowns. It's used to suggest the positioning of the lock of hair, it's at the top of the arm, but also the way in which it's as precious and valuable as a crown. The wreath of hair is metaphorically identified with the poetic voice's outward soul. Now, this isn't his actual soul, because that will have left his body at the point of death and hopefully be in heaven. But it does act as a sign or a substitute or a symbol for it. The same concept's extended through the metaphor of the hair acting as viceroy to the soul that's already gone to heaven. Now, a viceroy is a person who acts as the substitute for an absent monarch. We might think, for example, of the Viceroy of India under the Victorian age. But here, the soul is the original ruler of the body. The hair is described as controlling the physical body in the way that the soul would, ensuring that the body doesn't fall apart or decay. Obviously, once the soul has gone to heaven, the body would naturally decay, according to Elizabethan beliefs. The conceit of the viceroy is extended through the use of language from that semantic field of states, provinces and dissolution, which is a formal ending of a partnership, often between organisations or states. So we've got this sense of control that's conveyed through this metaphor. The poetic voice produces a lengthy argument that begins with the premise that the threads that extend from his brain bind the parts of his body together. That concept's based on an Elizabethan medical concept of the brain extending threads through the body in order to control those parts. And Donne recognises the significance of what we'd now call the nervous system, and most importantly, the significance of the brain within that system. So he uses that belief as the premise for his next argument. So we've got to accept that the brain uses these kind of sinews, this nervous system, to control the body. If the sinewy thread of the brain's nervous system can make a unity from all the body's constituent parts, then leads us into his next premise. Those hairs from the woman, the ones that are on the bracelet around his wrist, which upward grew from her head, would be more able to unify him, given that they have strength and art, power and skill, derived from a better brain. So this is a very flattering statement, that the hairs from the woman's head are going to be more able to control his body, more effective than his own soul, because they come from a better brain. So he suggests that the wreath of her hair will possess those properties that will prevent the dissolution of his body, the one that was described just a little earlier. And the sense of the woman's power being greater than his own could be presented through the repetition of the comparative adjective better, and also through that powerful alliteration of the plosive b. A better brain can better and then do it. So you've got those hard, powerful sounds that represent the power of her hair, and by association, her. The caesura of the semicolon after can better do it ends the initial premise and acts as a turning point. The poetic voice considers an alternative reading. Rather than offering him the bracelet of hair as some form of preservative token, it could have been intended by the woman as a symbol of painful rejection. It's worth recognising that for the Elizabethan and Jacobean reader, except would have meant unless. So Donne's considering this other possibility. The extent of his suffering is conveyed through the simile of the prisoner. That image is appropriate given the bracelet of hair appearing in the same position as a manacle would, and the poetic voice presents themselves as chained to their unrequited love. The woman has rejected him, but he's far from rejecting her. He considers that maybe the woman has gifted him this bracelet, intending to extend his suffering. And the Catholic imagery is extended through the references to idolatry and relics. The bracelet of hairs is given its value through association with the martyr, the person who has suffered. Idolatry, the worship of idols or objects, is to be avoided by burying the relic with the poetic voice, so that none can be drawn to its power and then commit idolatry, which would have been a profound sin for the Protestant readership. The poetic voice's concerns are dismissed in the next stanza. He demands that it should be buried with him, whatever the woman meant by the gift. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. He uses this Catholic imagery by the poetic voice describing himself as love's martyr. He's died for love as a result of the woman's rejection of him. Donne uses the volta to subvert the reader's expectations of the poetic voice. He begins by claiming that he was humble or subservient to the woman, by declaring the wreath of hair to have all the power of a soul, and to have more power than his own soul, remember. It comes from a better brain. But just as he was humble in making the claim about the significance of the hair, so he's brave in condemning it to the grave. It seems as if his revenge for his love being unrequited is to take a part of her with him into death. The connection between the way he's been treated and his actions are established through that parallelism of none of me, some of you. There's a clear connection. So if we take a look at the structure of the poem, it's written in 3 octaves, the regularity of which could convey the continuity of love, perhaps ironically. The meter, well, lines 1, 3 and 4 are iambic pentameter, line 2 iambic dimeter, line 5 and 7 iambic trimeter, line 6 iambic hexameter, and line 8 iambic heptameter. So there are frequent changes here, and that could represent the poetic voice's attitude to the woman's feelings. Those are changing. There's uncertainty here throughout. Is this a loving token to preserve the body from dissolution of the soul and show the extent to which love is eternal, or is it a way of mocking him and providing some way of suggesting that their unrequited love is going to be maintained? The rhyme scheme AB, AB, CD, CD is very clear. It's very regular. And again, therefore, perhaps complementing the significance of the octaves in representing the continuity of feeling. And form, it's elegaic. We're dealing with death here. and it's being used to present feelings of bitterness and retribution potentially. Okay, take care. Ta.